Hello and welcome to the next video of CISSP certification training domain 1, security and risk management. When a risk is identified, the next step is to plan for minimizing or remediating that risks. There are a few different ways to respond to a risk, and depending on the risk itself, organization environment, and the risk appetite, different approach might be taken in different organizations. There are four main types of risk response, and they are risk acceptance, which means we are good to accept the risk as it is and no further action is required. There are two things that you need to know when it comes to the risk acceptance. Risk appetite, which is the company's high level stand on what is acceptable, and the risk tolerance, which is the acceptable level on each relevant risk itself. For example, company risk appetite may say any low risk is acceptable. If we look into the qualitative method, the company risk appetite may say any low risk is acceptable, but we might decide to accept a medium risk for a particular situation. And that's our risk tolerance for that particular risk or for that particular department within the company. Risk mitigation is the other type of risk response, which basically means lowering the risk to an acceptable level by implementing some security controls. For example, laptop encryption is implemented to avoid sensitive data loss when losing laptops. Risk transference, which is about transferring the risk to someone else. So for example, you can transfer the risk to an insurance company or a third party for a particular risk. And finally, risk avoidance is the other type of risk response. And as the name says, it's all about avoiding that particular risk. For example, not doing a project or not going through an acquisition to basically avoid the risks associated with those. Countermeasure is basically a control that is put in place to protect an asset and reduce risks associated with that asset. Important note about countermeasure or control is that the value of the countermeasure implementation should be less than the asset value itself. Otherwise, implementing it doesn't make sense. There are three main types of countermeasures or controls: physical, technical, and administrative. Physical controls are like locks, gates, alarms, cameras, and so on for a particular building. Technical controls are like malware protection, firewalls, encryption, and so on. And administrative controls are those ones related to people and procedures, who is authorized, who is approving, who is monitoring, who is auditing, and so on and so forth. Another way of categorizing countermeasures is to categorize them with their functions. We can divide the countermeasures or controls into 6 main functions, and they are preventative, detective, corrective, recovery, deterrent, and compensating. Let's explain them with some examples. Preventative controls are like antiviruses, IPSs, encryption, firewalls, fences, locks. Basically things that they are preventing a risk from happening. Detective controls, on the other hand, are there to basically detect the risk. And they're like alarms, surveillance, SIEM or security information event management solutions, intrusion detection systems, and so on. Corrective controls are the type of controls that they actually help with correcting a situation if a risk happens. Antivirus signatures, patching, backup restores, and so on and so forth. Example of recovery controls are disaster recovery, business continuity plans. So when there is a disaster, we need to make sure that the business can be recovered. Deterrent controls examples are security guards, dogs, barbed wire, and so on. So they're basically the type of controls that they are alarming the threat and trying to basically prevent the threat from happening. And compensating controls are basically the type of controls that they can compensate other controls that we have. For example, if you don't have enough technical controls or administrative controls or controls that basically are not completely preventing the risk, we could use compensating controls. Examples of compensating controls are separation of duty, job rotation, insurance, and so on. As we discussed before, the cost of control implementation should be really lower than the value of the asset or the cost of the risk itself. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. A return of investment or ROI will be used to ensure we get some value from implementing security controls long term. And it is not an investment that is going to go waste. In summary, return of investment equals annualized loss expectancy minus risk mitigation control TCO or total cost of ownership. Let's explain how it's done with an example. Using previous example of laptop loss, if you remember, we calculated the annualized loss expectancy as $900,000 per year. If we decide to put laptop encryption as a control in place and encrypt all the laptops, and the laptop encryption solution costs $50 per laptop plus $10 annual maintenance, and there are assumingly 1,000 laptops, the TCO or total cost of ownership for the first year would be $60,000 to encrypt all of those laptops, right? 50 plus 10 is going to be $60, and we have 1,000 laptops, it's going to be $60,000. While the second year is going to even drop further, right? So it's going to be $10,000 for the second year because it's only the maintenance fee that we have to pay. So in the above example, the return of investment would be as below, right? First year, we got $900,000 is the actual ALE or annualized loss expectancy that we calculated before, minus $60,000 is the control cost that we're putting in place. So $840,000 is the actual return of investment for the first year, and the second year is going to be more than that. It's going to be $890,000. So you see that the cost of implementing a solution or control is reducing the risks substantially, and obviously the return of investment makes a lot of sense in this scenario.